August is winding down, so it's time for the minor league update. The Sacramento River Cats taking on the Reno Aces here at the porch. On the hill for the Aces is the right-hander Emilio Vargas. He'll be opposed by a right-hander in Josh James, making his 8th start down in AAA. Take a look at the River Cats lineup as well. 1-2-9, Mooney leading off, and opposed by the Aces lineup with the former Giant Franklin Barreto leading off. Top of the second, runners on first and second. Infield fly role here is Miraglio, the former Giants farmhand, pops up. After that, Blaze Alexander dribbles one down the third baseline, and Noisy makes the throw to first. Now it's second and third with 2 outs, and then it's going to be a ground ball to first base. Panis makes the play as he steps on the bag. Onto the top half of the third now, Franklin Barreto tries to lay down a bunt for a single, and he's going to be denied as Sheldon Noisy fires a strike over to first base to retire Barreto. After that, Wilson would come to the plate, and he would hit a ball down the left field line. Strange gets it off before it gets into the corner, so it's only going to be a single for Wilson. But then after that, Brodsky comes to the plate, and then a weird hop gets over the first baseman, Panis, and allows Wilson to go first to third. So runners on the corners, 1 out for Robinson, who sends a ball to deep left center field. It's going to be caught by Kondo, but they do not have a shot at retiring him at home as he tags up and scores 1-0 Reno. Move things on to the bottom of the 6th, where Yaxel Rios comes on with a runner on first and 2 and 1 out. He's going to get a pop-up here from Domingo Leyba in foul territory. Panis puts that one away, and then for the final out of the inning, it would be Miraglio going down on the slurve. Move things along to the bottom half of the 6th now, where Sherwood Mooney's at the plate with 2 outs, and a nice piece of 2-out hitting. Gets the ball down in the right center field gap. It's going to be cut off, though, so it's only going to be a single for Mooney. Then Kondo comes to the plate, 2-0 count. Rips the ball down the right field line, just barely lands fair. Kondo is going into second, Mooney into third. So runners on second and third, 2 outs for Derek Kloboff, who hits a line drive right at the third baseman. It is still a 1-0 game. Top of the 7th, Rafael Ponce comes on for Sacramento, and he would work a 1-2-3 inning, topped off by a 2-seamer that gets Barreto looking on the strikeout. On to the bottom of the 7th now, Connor Panis at the plate, hits a ball into right center field. That's going to get down into the gap, up against the wall, and Panis is not stopping at second base. He's going all the way into third. A triple for Connor Panis to lead off the inning. Next batter up would be Ricky Ruff, and he pulls the ball down the right field line past the diving glove of the first baseman. It's an RBI single, and Sacramento has tied this game at 1. TJ McFarland comes on for the bottom of the 9th to try to send this game to extra innings. And with Robert Kondo at the plate, chops one over to shortstop, fire over to first, and the first baseman drops it. That's an E3, and Kondo is safe. Then it brings up Panis as Kondo goes and swipes second base. Panis would unfortunately not be able to get him over, though, as he then strikes out. So 2 down, runner on second. Abital Avellino comes on to pinch hit with 2 down, and he would proceed to fly one out to shallow right field as we are headed to extra innings. Pick things up, bottom of the 10th, McFarland still on the hill. Mark Doc Strange hits one off the left field wall. That's going to be a double for the fleet-footed outfielder as he slides in feet first. So he's on second to lead off the inning. Tito Polo then came on to pinch hit with 2 outs as nothing else was going, and he chops one over to third base. The throw to first is going to be dropped yet again by the first baseman. That's 2 E3s by him. So runners on the corners for Sherwood Mooney, and he's going to chop one back to the pitcher. First baseman does not drop this one, and we're moving on to the 11th now. Seth Corey comes on, the lefty for the River Cats, and the first batter of the inning is going to be Wilson, who powers one out to left center field. That gets down into the gap. Easy double for Wilson to lead off the inning, but then Corey would buckle down. He gets Barreto to ground at the third. Runner's not able to move up, so 1 down. Then it brings up Robinson, and he's going to ground out to third base as well. Runner is not able to move up. After that, it brings up Thomas, and he's going to ground to the second. Doesn't matter, though. Runner moves up, doesn't care, so it's going to be a third out of the inning. And we move on to the 13th now, where Ronaldo Newberry comes on, and he's going to give up a single here to Ryan Hacker, the catcher. So he's on first base, and he would go and proceed to steal second, get himself into scoring position. The fleet-footed catcher Now on second with 1 out after the next batter struck out, and then Sherwood Mooney ground ball to short. It's another E3. This one just pops in and out of his glove. That is 3 errors on the first baseman. Then Kloboff comes up, hits a ground ball to third, and he's going to drop this one as well. What is going on with the Reno first baseman? 4 errors on the day for him. We have bases juiced, 2 outs for Connor Panis, who tripled earlier in the game. But here he's going to hit a long fly ball to right center field. Will that get down and end the game? It will not. It is caught on the run by the center fielder, saves the game. We move on to the 14th, where Jason Tutman came on, stayed on for the 15th, the last pitcher in the pen for the River Cats, gives up a double here to Blaze Alexander as he blazes on into second base, and then with 2 outs, Franklin Beretta would bloop one over to right field, lands in for a hit, and then bounces out of play, so it's an RBI ground rule double. 2-1 game now as the Reno Aces saved their closer for the inevitable bottom of the 15th inning, and with 1 out, it would be Sherwood Mooney going left center. That's getting down into the gap, up against the wall. The fleet-footed Mooney goes into second base with a double, so he's in scoring position, brings up Robert Kondo, sends the ball out to left field. It's going to be caught at the track. Mooney tries to tag up, but instead he is gunned down at third base. So that is your ball game, as the Reno Aces win this one 2-1 in an extremely boring game where nothing happens over the Sacramento River Cats in 15 innings. Blaze Alexander of the Reno Aces does get Player of the Game honors. He was 2 for 5 on the day with 2 doubles and a walk in this 2-1 victory for Reno. Now let's take a closer look at some of our players down on the AAA Sacramento River Cats, starting things off with the hitters, of course. The highest OPS on the team belonging to Ricky Ruff with a 929 OPS. He struggled a ton in his first few seasons in our organization, but last year he finally started putting it together, and this year he has extended that. I don't really think Ricky Ruff is ever going to be a starter for us in the major leagues, but he could end up being a decent backup infielder, possibly. I do have some guys in front of him who I want to get looks at the major leagues, but he's still a guy worth keeping around in the organization, assuming that he doesn't eventually get taken in the Rule 5 draft when he is available in that. Because some of these guys are going to start becoming available, and we're not going to be able to keep everybody because our system is pretty deep now. Then you have Robert Kondo, who is an outfielder who really stands out as someone to keep an eye on. He's got an 889 OPS. We signed him mid-season last year because, once again, we had a bunch of minor league injuries, needed to sign a first baseman because that's where he was listed, and he's a first baseman slash outfielder, but we changed his main position to center field for this year because he is a exceptional defensive player. He's got great fielding, great reaction, a very strong arm. It's inaccurate, but it's very strong. On the offensive side of the plate, he is very similar to someone like Lorenzo Ordonez or Derek Kloboff. Very high contact, very good plate skills. He's obviously just not as high of a ceiling as someone like Ordonez or Kloboff, since he has only AC potential, and he's also much better defensively than those two. While Mark Strange is an outfielder who is still performing in AAA for us, and he might end up being traded in the offseason because I just don't see how he gets any time in the big leagues with us. With all the outfielders we have in front of him now, especially someone like Kondo, and we have a bunch of other guys as well. One of those guys being Derek Kloboff, 812 OPS, 7 home runs, and 9 steals in AAA. He got a major ratings boost to contact and plate skills, so I would expect him to be, assuming that Manny Margot does not pick up his player option, Kloboff would be the guy who takes his spot on the roster. I'm also thinking about trading Stuart Fairchild in the offseason, and that would open up an outfield spot as well. Connor Panis, another outfielder who is probably in front of Mark Strange on the outfield depth chart. He's an outfielder slash first baseman. He tore it up in the first half of the season in AAA, but he struggled pretty hard in the second half. He's still got a pretty solid ratings boost, though, and even though he's much older than our other minor league outfielders, he'll be 31 next season. I think I've proven that I'm not opposed to having, like, late 20s, early 30s rookies. I mean, look at our starting second baseman in Peter Mooney. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. And then speaking of Mooney, we have the other Mooney, Sherwood, who was hurt yet again for a good chunk of the season. He also didn't really have that great of a year when he was playing. His ratings continue to go up, though, so I'm just hoping that once that durability keeps going up, that he will be fine. And who knows, he might even be able to replace Peter Mooney once he gets too old, because for whatever reason this game, I've noticed that players hit like 33 even, and then even when they perform, they lose like 3-4 points in all their ratings. We've also got Seth Mejias-Breen, who had a down year in the big leagues and AAA. Despite his great ratings, he just couldn't put it together this year for whatever reason. Hopefully he's able to pick that up next year. We've also got Sean Anderson, who spent pretty much all year in AAA. He was very solid in their rotation. He will definitely have a great shot to be in next year's big league pitching staff, whether that's in the bullpen or in the rotation, because we have a bunch of spots opening up, as I've been saying all season long. Next year's big league roster is definitely going to still be a good ball club. It's going to be more of a retool with a lot of younger players. I don't really want to go out and spend a lot of money in free agency this offseason. The plan is more to just get a lot of these guys who we've been developing up to the big leagues and let them play. Braylon Marquez is, of course, another guy who will be getting a serious look for the big league team next year. He had a pretty solid year in AAA, so definitely good to see that. We've also got Antoine Hinojosa, decent year in AAA for him. He's probably going to end up as a multi-inning reliever for us because his stamina isn't the greatest, and it's definitely not starter material stamina, but he is definitely a decent enough pitcher to where he could end up in our big league bullpen at some point. Tyler Beede, he had a very solid year in AAA for us. He had a sub-2 ERA. Still doesn't really strike at anybody, but his hit per 9 rating has gotten quite a boost over the last few seasons, so that is quite good at an 81 now. He is definitely another guy who could be looked at to be in our big league bullpen next year. If I had to predict, I would think a lot of our bullpen next year is going to be guys going up and down, sort of like Girardi did with the Yankees bullpen, where guys were just constantly going up and down in the Scranton shuttle. Or who knows, maybe a lot of these minor league relievers come up and they just absolutely shove, and I just have to keep them up because they're just so damn good. That would ideally be what happens. Then, of course, there is Josh James, who yet another year where he has a great year in AAA, and he's just awful in the big leagues. I'm really not sure what his future is with us at this point. I mean, maybe we bring him back for next season, maybe we don't. I do want to give, like I've been mentioning, all these other minor league relievers that we have a shot in the big leagues, and he's just definitely blocking those guys. Now, I know people are going to be like, why don't you trade him? He's got an A potential. You can take advantage of that. It's like, that's exactly why I don't trade him. He's a 30-year-old reliever who sucks. He doesn't have any trade value in real life if this was actually real life, but in this game he has an A potential, so if I wanted to, I could go and trade him for the best prospect in baseball. Especially if I changed his position to starting pitcher, and he was that overall A potential as a starter, I mean, I could absolutely fleece someone. It's just, I'm not going to do that because that's not what I do in my franchises. And now moving on to some other relievers, we've got Francisco Colon, who continues to be solid in the minors. I do want to see his control and break improve, but it's not going up at all, despite him performing, and despite that's what's being trained. He literally, the entire time he's been in my organization, I've had the bullpen as the thing selected to train him, which is where it does the control, the velocity, and the break, and it just hasn't improved at all. Because training in this game is just, there's no way to guarantee anything happens. Player development is essentially just let them play and hopefully, maybe, possibly, they do something. Then we've also got Rafael Ponce, who we signed in the offseason. He's been very good in AAA. He could definitely get some time in the big leagues next year with all those spots opening up. You got Yaxel Rios, who was acquired in the Aaron Altair to Philadelphia trade along with Austin Davis. He's been quite solid in AAA, and obviously I'm sounding like a broken record now, but he could also probably get a shot in the big leagues. TJ Trejo, of course, is striking out a lot of batters. Hopefully he can come back next year and be 2022 Trejo again. And then Jason Tuttman is also a guy who is going to need to figure all this out as well. And then there's also the fact that I really went all out with drafting bullpen pieces in this year's draft, so those guys are also going to be added to the mix in the minor leagues. Now moving on down to Double-A, taking a look at the Richmond Flying Squirrels taking on the Altoona Curve at Main Street Field. The Curve are sending out right-hander Austin Coley for the 25th time this season, and he will be opposed by the left-hander Bart Britton, making his 17th start for Richmond. Take a look at the Flying Squirrels lineup on the day 1-2-9, as well as the opposing Altoona Curve lineup. We'll start things off top half of the first. The leadoff hitter Jay draws himself a walk, so he's on first base. He is then going to try to swipe second, but PJ Brister, the recently converted catcher, nails him at second base. He is caught stealing, and then the inning would come to an end on a Ricky Stamper sliding catch in right field. Put a stamp on that inning. Move things on to the bottom of the first, where Stamper came to the plate, and he's going to stamp that ball out to left center field. That'll get down over the leaping glove at the center fielder. That's a double for Stamper, and he puts his stamp on the inning. On second now is Stamper. And then it's going to be a little bloop hit for Manzanillo, the first baseman. Drives in Stamper from second base. It's a 1-0 lead for the Flying Squirrels. On to the bottom half of the second now, Orlando Floyd laying down the drag bunt, showing off the speed. Beats it out for the single. He would then proceed to go and swipe second base easily in there before the throw. But it is the pitcher, Bart Britton, at the plate. He ends up doing like a check swing bunt sort of thing. Probably would have been safe if it was a normal runner going to first base, but it's a pitcher, so he is out. So still 1-0, bottom of the third. It's going to be a ground ball here and a jam from Britton. And he gets out of it with 2 runners on. So Julian Ozuna comes on in the 6th inning as we move things along, the strikeout master, and he would proceed to end the 6th inning with a strikeout on his slurve. Nasty pitch. On to the top of the 7th now, gets another strikeout on Arias on the slurve. And then the batter after that would be Jackson, who is also going down on, you guessed it, the slurve. And then it's still a 2-0 game as we move things along to the top of the 9th, where Willie Gomes comes on. He would proceed to strike out Arias to end the game as the Richmond Flying Squirrels win this extremely boring game over the Altoona Curve by a score of 2-0. A whopping 6 hits and 2 runs on the day for Richmond, while the Altoona Curve only had 1 hit on the day. I'm going to need this hitting slump that I'm in currently to end and for the bats to wake up.
Have to wake up bats.
But now let's move on to taking a look at some of the players on our AA roster down in Richmond. Starting things off with the hitters, we have Jalen Miller, who has the highest OPS on our AA team. He's been in the organization since day one of this franchise. He split time between AAA and AA this year because of how many injuries we had, and he performed well at both levels. He is definitely an interesting middle infielder to keep an eye on in the organization. Reynel Delgado, also an interesting infielder to keep an eye on. It's just, I'm hoping he does not retire because he has one of those injuries that could possibly result in a retirement. Jorge Figueroa is another one of those solid outfield prospects that we have. He just needs to improve offensively immensely before he gets a serious look in the big leagues. He's got some pop, he doesn't hit consistently, he doesn't get on base, he's just incredible in the field, but he does have a beat potential, so I'm hoping that he is able to improve his offense by the time that we do give him a look in the big leagues. Now, PJ Brister isn't really much of a prospect. I'm just mentioning him because he was catching in this game. You saw that he fired a guy out at second base. PJ Brister is an outfielder. We have had so many injuries to our minor leagues this year, and especially to the catcher position, that I didn't have room to sign anybody to our organization, and I had already made a trade like a week before this for a catcher, and then another catcher got hurt. So I was like, hey, let's just put somebody at catcher, and PJ Brister was the guy I chose because he had a strong arm, and I gave him like 40 blocking on his ratings, so he's just back there being a bad catcher essentially until the rest of them come back, and then once he comes back, we'll move his position back to outfield, and then he will never play catcher again. But like I said, he's not really much of a prospect. He's just kind of minor league depth, but I thought that was an interesting little tidbit of what's going on in the minor leagues for us. Also, Steve Ullman, not that great of a prospect, but he is Tom Ullman's younger brother. Just a cool story to have on our team in the minor leagues as depth. Now onto the pitching side of things, we've got Marco Murillo, who I did show a prospect profile of. He might even get a shot in the big league rotation next year. He might start the year in AAA. He might start the year in the big leagues. We'll see how it shakes out. I'm probably going to end up showing some spring training again for Season 6 to kick off that year and see who performs and who wins what job, because we're going to have a lot of jobs up for grabs next year, a lot of spots on the roster up for grabs. So I feel like it just makes sense to actually show some spring training. There's also Julian Ozuna, who had a very good year in AA, 165 strikeouts through 130 innings pitched. His K/9 rating makes me think that he could be a very good reliever. He throws extremely hard, strikes at a lot of people. We saw he has a nasty slurve. And he's only 18 years old, so he still has plenty of time to develop his other per-9 ratings to catch up to not where his K/9 is, because that's obviously going to be much better than the rest of his stuff, but maybe in like the low to mid-60s. We've also got Bart Britton, who also had a solid year in AA. He is a left-handed pitcher with a ton of different pitches, but he actually throws pretty hard. Has lots of movement on his pitches, but he also throws like mid-90s as well. He also limits walks. He's only 20 years old, so he's definitely an interesting C potential guy to have in the organization. We've also got Willie Gomes, who was a part of all those relievers that came up, guys like TJ Trejo and Jason Tupman and then Francisco Colon. Gomes has been in Double-A because he's definitely way more raw of a prospect than any of those guys. He's sort of similar to Ozuna, that in the aspect that he needs to work on his other ratings aside from his K/9, but he also doesn't throw nearly as hard as Julian Ozuna, and he's also not able to work multiple innings like Ozuna can. And then we've also got the Canadian finesse lefty in our bullpen in Double-A. This has been by far his worst year in our organization, and he still had a pretty average season, so Bryant Crandall is definitely a guy to keep an eye on as well. I believe he's only 21, so still a very young player. And with that being said, that is going to wrap things up here for this edition of the San Francisco Giants franchise. I've been your host, Jerseyborn, and I am saying, if you ain't got no giddy up, then giddy out my way.